Ellen Thompson, a 68-year-old janitor at Hartwell Industries, pushed her cleaning cart down the long corridor, her movements slow but steady. For over 40 years, she had walked these halls, quietly tending to the company's needs, though to most, she remained unseen. A ghost who appeared only when there was a mess to clean. Little did Ellen know, her life was on the brink of a dramatic change. An unexpected confrontation was about to shatter the routines of her day, unveiling the darker side of corporate culture. How would one woman's humiliation spark a revolution that would transform an entire company? Before we dive into this powerful story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories like this one, be sure to hit subscribe so you won't miss out on more inspiring tales. Bookmark. Ellen Thompson pushed her cleaning cart down the long hallway of Hartwell Industries, each step heavy with the weight of countless responsibilities. Her back and knees ached, constant reminders that her body was no longer young. And each twinge brought her back to the reason she couldn't afford to stop working. Since her daughter's passing 2 years ago, Ellen has been the sole caregiver for her 3 young grandchildren. Her days stretched endlessly between her cleaning shifts at Hartwell and the time she spent tending to the children, doing her best to fill the void left in their lives. She often found herself running through endless lists in her mind, groceries to buy, bills to pay, doctor appointments to schedule, and all the small details of keeping her little family together. Her doctor had advised her to slow down, but Ellen couldn't imagine a life without the income this job provided. She couldn't let her grandchildren suffer because she needed a rest. So each day she ignored her body's protests, took a deep breath, and pushed on. As she entered the executive wing, Ellen heard a cheerful voice call out, breaking her from her thoughts. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson." Daniel Evans, a young accountant in the finance department, greeted her warmly. His sincere smile was a bright spot in her otherwise demanding day. Ellen looked up, surprised and pleased by the greeting. "Good morning, Mr. Evans," she replied, her voice softened by appreciation. Daniel was one of the few employees who treated her with kindness and respect, qualities she'd found increasingly rare over her years at Hartwell Industries. Daniel leaned against the wall, still smiling. "How are you today, and how are the grandkids?" A faint smile touched Ellen's lips. "They're growing fast, keeping me on my toes every single day. Sometimes, I don't know where I find the energy." Daniel nodded, his eyes reflecting genuine interest. "You're amazing, Mrs. Thompson. I'm sure they're grateful for all you do." Before Ellen could respond, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Evans, don't you have work to do?" Mark Richardson, the department manager, strode toward them, his shoes clicking authoritatively on the polished floor. His expression was one of obvious disdain as his eyes swept over Ellen. Daniel's warm smile vanished, replaced by a more neutral expression as he stood up straight. "Of course, Mr. Richardson. I was just heading to my desk," he replied politely, moving to leave. As Daniel walked away, Mark turned to Ellen, his gaze hard and unfeeling. "And you, make sure you clean this area properly today. I'm tired of seeing dust in the corners." Ellen lowered her gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Mr. Richardson, I'll do my best." "Your best," he repeated, scoffing. Without another word, he turned and strode away, leaving Ellen alone once more. Ellen took a deep breath, steadying herself against the familiar sting of his words. She'd grown used to the way Mark treated her, and although it hurt, she had little choice but to accept it. This wasn't the first time he'd spoken to her in such a dismissive way, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. As she resumed her cleaning duties, Ellen's mind drifted to how much things had changed at Hartwell Industries over the years. She had started at the company decades ago, back when it had felt like a second home. Her colleagues had been friendly, and management had shown appreciation for her dedication. However, as the years passed, those familiar faces gradually retired, replaced by newer, younger ones, and the company culture shifted. The kindness and camaraderie she once cherished had faded, leaving her feeling like an outsider. Mark Richardson embodied everything Ellen found disheartening about the changes at Hartwell. He had climbed the corporate ladder with ruthless efficiency, often stepping on those he considered beneath him. Ellen felt his disdain each time he looked her way, as if she was a nuisance he had to tolerate. In a way, Ellen understood that Mark was simply a symptom of the broader shift within Hartwell. As the company expanded, it became less about people and more about profit. Employees like her, who had dedicated decades to the company, were no longer valued. Mark's dismissive attitude reminded Ellen that, in his eyes, she was little more than an inconvenience, a relic of a bygone era he was determined to erase. But what Ellen didn't know was that her quiet strength and determination had not gone unnoticed. Daniel Evans, the young accountant who greeted her every morning, had watched the interactions between her and Mark for months. Each time Mark belittled her, Daniel's heart ached with a mixture of frustration and guilt. He joined Hartwell straight out of college, eager to make his mark in the corporate world, and quickly learned that keeping a low profile was often safer. Mark's reputation for belittling employees, especially those from minority backgrounds, was well known in the office, and few dared to challenge him. Back at his cubicle, Daniel struggled to focus on his work, the memory of Ellen's weary smile lingering in his mind. He wanted to speak up, to defend her, but the fear of retaliation kept him silent. Losing his job could mean losing his livelihood, and the thought of being blacklisted in the industry terrified him. He stared blankly at his computer screen, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. His conscience whispered that he should do something, that someone needed to stand up for Ellen. But the reality of his situation weighed heavily on him, stifling any thoughts of defiance. Mark was too well connected, too powerful. Any attempt to confront him would likely end with Daniel facing serious consequences. Daniel sighed, feeling trapped by his own fear. He knew he wasn't brave enough to risk everything he'd worked for, and yet, each day he watched Mark demean Ellen, he felt a little more ashamed of himself. He couldn't shake the sense that he was failing her, even as he convinced himself that there was nothing he could do. As the day wore on, Daniel's gaze drifted across the office, his thoughts consumed by Ellen's quiet resilience. He'd often wondered what kept her going, what strength she must possess to endure Mark's constant criticism without breaking. In his heart, Daniel admired her, even as he resented his own inability to stand up for her. Little did he know, events were already in motion that would soon force him to confront his own fears and the consequences of his silence. For the next several days, Daniel couldn't shake the image of Ellen's tired face and the quiet way she absorbed Mark's coldness. She never complained and never fought back. She simply did her job, showing up each day to clean and maintain the office. For years, she had worked tirelessly to keep things spotless, often staying late into the evening. Yet the respect she deserved was nowhere to be found. In his first year at Hartwell, Daniel had quickly learned the unspoken rule about staying on Mark Richardson's good side. Mark ruled his department with a kind of arrogant authority, making it clear that he valued productivity above all else. And for those he deemed the help, like Ellen, the rules didn't apply. Daniel knew that Mark's prejudice wasn't subtle, and he'd witnessed enough incidents to realize that standing up to him could come with a high price. Sitting at his desk, Daniel found himself clenching his fists, frustrated with his own powerlessness. He felt a nagging sense of guilt every time he watched Ellen suffer through Mark's demeaning remarks. Yet he kept his head down, convincing himself he couldn't change anything. He knew Mark had connections with the board, and rumors floated around that anyone who spoke against him would be quietly removed from the company. Daniel had worked too hard to get where he was. He couldn't afford to jeopardize his position. As he grappled with his conflicting emotions, Daniel's thoughts turned to the reality of Ellen's situation. The demands of raising 3 grandchildren on her own weighed on her, and he couldn't imagine how difficult that must be. He remembered the way her face would brighten briefly when she spoke about them, even as her shoulders sagged from exhaustion. She didn't deserve to be treated this way, yet the injustice seemed beyond his ability to change. One afternoon, Daniel passed by Ellen as she scrubbed a stubborn stain on the office floor. She was on her knees, pushing the mop back and forth with determination, her back bent at an awkward angle. Her face showed signs of weariness, but there was also a quiet dignity in the way she worked, as if she refused to let her hardships define her. Just as he was about to greet her, Mark's familiar voice echoed down the hallway, sharp and taunting. "Well, well," Mark sneered as he approached Ellen. "Still at it, Thompson? You'd think after all these years you'd be better at this by now." Ellen didn't look up, her hands gripping the mop handle tightly as she focused on her work. "I'm doing my best, Mr. Richardson," she murmured softly, her voice barely audible. "Your best?" Mark laughed mockingly. "If this is your best, then I'd hate to see what your worst looks like. Honestly, I don't know why we even keep you around." Daniel watched from a distance, his stomach churning as Mark continued to berate Ellen. It felt like he was witnessing a terrible scene in a movie, but this was real. It was Ellen's daily reality. He wanted to intervene, to tell Mark to stop, but his body seemed frozen in place. The fear of standing up to his boss kept him rooted, even as his conscience screamed at him to act. Mark leaned in closer, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're nothing but a relic, Thompson. A leftover from an era that doesn't belong in a modern workplace like this. Maybe it's time you realize that." Ellen's shoulders slumped slightly, but she kept her head down, absorbing each cruel word. Daniel could see the pain in her eyes, though she tried to hide it, holding herself together with a strength he both admired and pitied. The moment dragged on, and still, Daniel remained silent. He told himself that someone else might step in, that maybe another manager would overhear and put an end to Mark's tirade. But no one came. In the sterile quiet of the office, Mark's voice was the only sound, cutting through the air like a blade. Finally, Mark smirked, satisfied, and strode off without a backward glance. Ellen slowly straightened, clutching the mop handle for support as she steadied herself. Her face showed no tears, no outward sign of distress, but Daniel could see the heaviness in her expression. She looked older in that moment, as though each word had added another year to her weary frame. As Mark disappeared down the hall, Daniel felt a pang of shame wash over him. He had watched his coworker endure outright cruelty, yet he had done nothing. The weight of his inaction settled on his shoulders like a heavy burden. How many times had he witnessed scenes like this? How many times had he chosen to look the other way? Returning to his cubicle, Daniel's mind whirled with thoughts of what he should have done. He could have defended her, could have called Mark out, but what would it have achieved? Mark would find a way to retaliate, and Daniel's career would be at risk. Still, he couldn't shake the sense that he had failed Ellen in a deeply personal way. Back at his desk, he opened his laptop and attempted to focus on his work, but the memory of Mark's words echoed in his mind, relentless and unforgiving. He wondered how Ellen coped with it and how she managed to keep going day after day. Her quiet endurance seemed both heroic and heartbreaking, a reminder of the strength she must possess to carry on. Daniel sighed, pressing his palms to his eyes in frustration. It wasn't fair. None of it was. And yet the fear of standing up to Mark kept him immobilized. He didn't want to lose his job and didn't want to jeopardize his future. But each time he looked at Ellen, he felt the sting of his own cowardice, an ever-present reminder of the injustice he allowed to happen. Later that evening, as he walked to his car, Daniel found himself staring at the dimly lit office building. The halls were empty, the lights casting long shadows across the polished floors. He couldn't escape the feeling that he was a part of a system that enabled people like Mark. His silence was a form of complicity, and deep down, he knew it. For the first time, Daniel realized that he couldn't go on pretending everything was fine. He had been avoiding the uncomfortable truth for too long, but the guilt gnawed at him, refusing to let him rest. He didn't know how or when, but he resolved that one day he would find the courage to stand up for Ellen. But for now, as he climbed into his car and drove home, he remained trapped in his own silence, a silent bystander in a world that felt increasingly out of his control. The following week, tensions in the office only seemed to grow thicker. Daniel found himself watching over Ellen more closely, feeling protective, even though he remained painfully aware of his inability to intervene. Ellen, as always, kept her head down and carried on, moving through her shifts with a quiet dignity that Daniel couldn't help but admire. Yet Mark's cutting remarks and belittling tone seemed to intensify, as if he took pleasure in making her life as difficult as possible. One afternoon, Daniel decided to take a quick break and headed toward the restrooms, hoping a few minutes of quiet would clear his head. As he entered, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind him. He slipped into one of the stalls, hoping for a moment of solitude. Just as he sat down, the door opened again, and he recognized Mark Richardson's heavy, confident stride. His heart sank as he realized he wasn't alone, but the sinking feeling quickly turned to dread when he heard Ellen's soft voice from the other side of the room. "Oh, Mr. Richardson, I was just finishing up in here," she said, her tone polite yet wary. Mark's voice oozed disdain. "Finishing up? You call this clean?" he scoffed, his voice echoing off the tile walls. "I've seen cleaner gas station bathrooms." Daniel's heart pounded as he listened, knowing that Ellen was in for yet another round of Mark's cruelty. He could see a narrow strip of the restroom through the gap in the stall door, catching glimpses of Ellen's figure and Mark's intimidating posture. Ellen tried to explain, her voice barely audible. I've been doing my best, sir. I'll go over it again if it's not satisfactory." Mark sneered, stepping closer. "Your best," he repeated with a mocking laugh. "Your best isn't even close to good enough, Thompson. You're nothing more than a relic, a sad reminder of a time when people like you thought they could contribute something to a place like this." The words hung in the air, sharp and filled with venom. Daniel felt a wave of nausea as he listened, his fingers clenched tightly around his knees. He wanted to leap out of the stall, to tell Mark to stop, to defend Ellen, but the fear that had held him back so many times before rooted him in place. Mark continued, his voice growing colder. "Do you know what your problem is, Thompson? You're either too stupid or too stubborn to realize that your kind doesn't belong in a workplace like this anymore. The only reason you're still here is because no one else wants to do this filthy job." Ellen's shoulders slumped, her head lowered. Daniel could see her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the mop handle, as if she were trying to ground herself against the torrent of verbal abuse. "I've been with this company for over 40 years, Mr. Richardson," she managed, her voice choked with emotion. "I take pride in my work." "Pride?" Mark laughed harshly, the sound echoing through the room. "What pride could you possibly have, pushing a mop around all day? Face it, Thompson, you're just dead weight, holding the rest of us back." Daniel's anger surged as he watched Mark's relentless assault. He could see Ellen struggling to hold back tears, her fingers whitening as she gripped the mop handle even tighter. The cruelty in Mark's words went beyond simple disrespect. It was intended to break her spirit. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest. He knew he had to do something. But even as he fought against the fear inside him, his mind was flooded with the potential consequences, losing his job, being blacklisted, the risk of failure. His body refused to move, and he hated himself for it. The barrage of insults finally ended, and with a final sneer, Mark turned on his heel and left the restroom. Ellen stood in silence, her shoulders hunched and her breathing shallow. Daniel could see her trembling as she tried to regain her composure. Only when the door clicked shut did Daniel feel himself relax, and yet he knew he'd failed Ellen once again. He sat there in the stall, frozen by shame and guilt, his heart breaking for the woman who had endured so much. Moments later, he heard Ellen's soft, muffled sobs echo in the small space. Each cry was like a knife to his conscience, a reminder of his cowardice. He wanted to reach out to her, to say something comforting, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. The fear of being discovered held him back. After what felt like an eternity, Ellen's sobs faded, replaced by the quiet, shuffling sounds of her gathering her supplies. The bathroom door opened, then closed again, and Daniel was left alone, the silence feeling heavier than any words. When he finally stepped out of the stall, Daniel made his way to the sink, splashing cold water on his face as if it could wash away the weight of his guilt. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, hardly recognizing the person looking back at him. He felt small, diminished by his failure to stand up for someone who needed him. As he dried his hands, Daniel whispered to himself, "I should have said something. I should have done something." The words were bitter on his tongue, a confession he couldn't deny. Back at his desk, Daniel struggled to focus on his work. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ellen's face, etched with pain and resignation, her shoulders weighed down by years of quiet suffering. He felt like a coward, a bystander in a tragedy he could have helped prevent. And yet, despite his guilt, He knew he would probably stay silent again tomorrow, caught in the endless cycle of fear and inaction. The rest of the day passed in a blur, his mind heavy with regret. He thought of all the small ways he could try to show kindness to Ellen, greeting her warmly in the mornings, leaving a cup of coffee on her cart with a note. But he knew it wasn't enough. Nothing he did could erase the memory of that moment in the restroom, the moment when he could have acted but didn't. That night, as he lay in bed, sleep eluded him. His mind replayed Mark's words, Ellen's trembling figure, and his own reflection in the mirror. He felt trapped, both by his own fear and by the knowledge that he was complicit in the injustice he'd witnessed. And as the hours dragged on, Daniel made a silent promise to himself. One day, he would find the courage to stand up for Ellen. He would find a way to break free from his own cowardice. But for now, all he could do was wait, hoping that, somehow, he would be able to keep that promise. The days that followed were tense and weighed heavily on Daniel. Each time he passed Ellen in the hall, he felt his chest tighten with guilt. She was moving slower than usual, and her face was even paler, etched with exhaustion. Despite his fear of Mark, Daniel found himself increasingly preoccupied with thoughts of Ellen and the silent struggles she faced every day. Then, one morning, everything came to a breaking point. Daniel was working at his desk when he heard a sudden commotion down the hallway. Concerned murmurs rose from nearby cubicles, and he caught snippets of worried voices. Rising from his chair, he moved toward the source of the noise, his heart pounding. When he reached the hallway, he froze. Ellen was lying on the floor, her face pale and eyes closed, her frail body crumpled near her cleaning cart. A few employees had gathered around her, some attempting to offer assistance, while others simply watched with looks of shock and concern. Daniel pushed his way through the small crowd, his mind racing. "Mrs. Thompson," he called, his voice laced with panic. He knelt beside her, checking her pulse as he tried to remain calm. She was breathing, but barely, and her skin felt cold to the touch. One of his coworkers looked at him with wide eyes. "Someone needs to call an ambulance," they urged, and Daniel nodded, already pulling out his phone. As he dialed, the doors to Mark Richardson's office swung open, and Mark emerged with an irritated expression. His eyes narrowed as he took in the scene before him, his annoyance obvious. He walked toward the crowd, pushing past a few employees to get a better view of Ellen on the floor. "For heaven's sake," Mark muttered, crossing his arms. "Can she not even manage to stay on her feet? This is precisely why we need younger, more capable staff." Daniel looked up at Mark, barely able to contain his disbelief. "Mr. Richardson," he said, his voice steady but laced with anger. "This is serious. She needs medical attention." Mark waved a dismissive hand as if brushing away Daniel's concern. Fine. Call an ambulance if you must, but make sure they know she's not to come back until she's fit for work. We're running a business here, not a charity." Daniel's jaw tightened as he processed Mark's callous words. How could someone be so indifferent, so completely lacking in basic humanity? Ellen lay helpless on the floor, yet all Mark could think about was his own agenda. He felt a surge of anger unlike anything he had ever experienced, but the fear of challenging Mark kept him from speaking up. The paramedics arrived within minutes, quickly assessing Ellen's condition and preparing her for transport to the hospital. Daniel stayed close by, watching anxiously as they loaded her onto the stretcher. When she was finally wheeled out of the building, the crowd began to disperse, the initial shock giving way to whispered discussions among the employees. Back at his desk, Daniel sat in silence, his mind consumed by a mix of anger, guilt, and helplessness. His hands trembled as he tried to process everything that had just happened. Ellen's collapse, Mark's cold response, each detail weighed on him like a stone, pressing down on his conscience. Throughout the day, whispers circulated around the office. Employees gathered in small groups, discussing Ellen's condition and expressing concern over what had happened. Many shared similar sentiments, shocked and disgusted by the way Mark had reacted. Daniel found himself at the center of these discussions, his coworkers peppering him with questions. One of his colleagues leaned in close, her voice low. "Is it true that Mr. Richardson just stood there and didn't try to help?" Daniel nodded grimly. He seemed more concerned about the disruption to work than Mrs. Thompson's health. Another coworker shook his head in disbelief. That's Mark for you, always putting profit over people. As they spoke, Daniel felt a surge of frustration. His anger at Mark's lack of compassion was palpable, but so was his disappointment in himself. Every time he thought about Ellen lying on the floor, he was reminded of the countless times he had stayed silent, choosing to ignore the injustice unfolding right in front of him. That evening, as he tried to catch up on the work he'd neglected, Daniel overheard a conversation in the break room that would change everything. "Did you hear the news?" a woman's voice asked quietly. Daniel recognized her as Sarah from Human Resources. "What news?" another voice replied. "The board just announced it. We're getting a new CEO. Apparently Mr. Jennings is retiring." The words caught Daniel's attention immediately. He moved closer, straining to hear more. "Who's the new CEO?" someone else asked. Sarah replied, "His name is Jack Hamilton. That's all I know for now." Daniel's mind raced. A new CEO meant potential changes, possibly even a shift in the company culture that had allowed people like Mark to thrive. He dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, things could improve under this new leadership. But as soon as the hope flared, doubt extinguished it. What if Jack Hamilton was just as ruthless as Mark? What if the new CEO prioritized profits over people, just as his predecessor had? Daniel couldn't let himself get too hopeful, but he couldn't ignore the flicker of possibility either. The next day, the office was buzzing with speculation. Rumors about Jack Hamilton's management style circulated, with some employees claiming he was a hardline cost-cutter, while others insisted he was a progressive reformer. Nobody knew for certain, and Mark's tense demeanor did little to reassure anyone. It was clear that Mark wasn't pleased about the upcoming change in leadership, and his temper seemed to flare even more than usual. Finally, the day of Mr. Hamilton's arrival came. Daniel arrived at the office early, his stomach knotted with a mix of nerves and anticipation. He half expected to see some dramatic changes, but the office looked the same as it always had, each cubicle and desk as familiar as ever. As he settled at his desk, he heard Mark's voice from his office, raised in irritation. "I don't care what his background is," he was saying, his tone dripping with disdain. "This new CEO better not think he can come in here and change everything I've built in this department." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. It was clear that Mark had no intention of changing his ways, new CEO or not. His arrogance was undiminished, his confidence in his own power still absolute. But mid-morning, Daniel nearly bumped into a man he didn't recognize near the break room. The stranger was dressed casually, a stark contrast to the business suits that filled the office. He smiled warmly as Daniel stepped aside to let him pass. "Sorry about that," Daniel said, embarrassed. "No problem at all," the man replied, his tone friendly. "Say you wouldn't happen to know where I could find Mark Richardson's office, would you?" Daniel nodded, pointing down the hallway. "Last door on the right. It's the biggest office on the floor." "Thanks," the man said, then hesitated. "By the way, is there anything I should know about Mr. Richardson before I meet him?" Daniel felt a flicker of uncertainty. Should he warn this newcomer about Mark's behavior? But what if this man was a friend of Mark's, or worse, someone sent to test employee loyalty? "Mr. Richardson is very focused on results," Daniel said carefully. "He runs a tight ship." The man nodded thoughtfully. "I see. Well, thank you for your help, Miss Evans." "Daniel Evans." "Nice to meet you, Daniel," the man replied, extending his hand. "I'm Jack Hamilton." Daniel's heart skipped a beat as the man introduced himself. This was the new CEO, Jack Hamilton, the very person everyone had been speculating about. Recovering from his surprise, he shook Jack's hand, barely managing a nod of acknowledgement. Jack Hamilton didn't look like a typical corporate executive. There was a down-to-earth confidence about him, a warmth that seemed almost out of place in the rigid, profit-driven culture of Hartwell Industries. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Hamilton," Daniel finally replied, trying to hide his shock. "Please, just call me Jack," he replied with a smile, and without another word, he headed down the hallway toward Mark's office. As Jack walked away, Daniel felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. He hadn't expected to meet the new CEO in such a casual setting, let alone have the opportunity to provide a subtle warning about Mark. Watching Jack walk purposefully down the corridor, Daniel realized he might have missed his chance to reveal the reality of Mark's oppressive management style. But there was no turning back now. Moments after Jack entered Mark's office, the entire floor grew silent. From his desk, Daniel could hear Mark's raised voice, agitated and confrontational, though he couldn't make out every word. "Who do you think you are?" Mark's voice thundered, unmistakable even from a distance. "Coming in here, dressed like that, asking questions? This is my department, and I won't have some outsider telling me how to run things." Daniel felt a thrill of dread and curiosity ripple through him. It was rare to see Mark openly challenged, and he couldn't help but wonder how Jack would respond. As the shouting grew louder, employees nearby exchanged nervous glances, most of them looking as tense as Daniel felt. Suddenly, the door to Mark's office swung open, and Jack stepped out. His expression was calm, though a steely glint in his eyes hinted at the fire within. Behind him, Mark's face was red with anger, and his stance was one of barely contained fury. Jack turned to face the office floor, his voice carrying clearly across the room. "I believe it's time we had a company-wide meeting," he announced, his gaze sweeping over the employees gathered nearby. It was at that moment that Daniel, along with everyone else in the office, realized exactly who this man was. The murmurs grew louder as people pieced together the truth, some exchanging surprised smiles while others looked uneasy. Mark's discomfort was obvious, his expression one of sheer disbelief as he watched Jack address the employees. Jack continued, his voice unwavering. "I'm Jack Hamilton, your new CEO, and I've already seen some serious issues that need to be addressed here." Daniel's pulse quickened as Jack's words settled over the office like a challenge. This wasn't the polite, distant kind of announcement they were used to from the higher-ups. Jack's tone was direct, leaving no room for misinterpretation. He had no intention of allowing the status quo to continue. "Everyone, please gather in the main conference room in 5 minutes, Jack instructed. "It's time we had an honest conversation about the culture of this company." Employees filed toward the conference room, whispering in hushed tones as they exchanged glances of anticipation and surprise. Daniel walked slowly, feeling a strange mixture of hope and anxiety. This was a moment he hadn't dared imagine, and yet here they were, about to address the culture of Hartwell Industries openly. For the first time, it felt like change was possible. Inside the conference room, a tense silence filled the air as employees found their seats. Mark entered last, choosing a spot near the back of the room, his expression carefully guarded. Jack stood at the front, his casual attire and calm demeanor a stark contrast to the formality of the room. Jack began without a preamble. "I'd planned to spend my first few days observing and getting to know the company, but I've already seen enough to know that we need to make some major changes." He looked around the room, his gaze landing on each person for a brief moment before moving on. "I believe in creating a workplace where every employee, regardless of their position or background, is treated with respect, and from what I've witnessed, we have a long way to go to achieve that standard." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Some employees looked relieved, while others appeared uncertain. Mark shifted uncomfortably but remained silent, his expression one of growing anger as Jack continued. "Discrimination, harassment, and abusive behavior will not be tolerated under my leadership," Jack said firmly. "This isn't just about profits, it's about people. Starting tomorrow, we'll be implementing new policies and procedures to ensure a safe and respectful work environment for everyone." Daniel sat at the edge of his seat, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. Jack's words resonated with him deeply, and he felt a flicker of hope stirring within him, a hope he hadn't felt in a long time. Jack's gaze softened slightly as he continued. "I also want each of you to know that my door is always open. If you've experienced or witnessed inappropriate behavior, please come forward. I promise your concerns will be heard and addressed." The room remained silent as Jack's words settled over the employees, each of them processing the implications of his announcement. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. This was a chance to finally speak up, to share the things he'd kept bottled up for so long. As people filed out of the conference room, Daniel felt a tap on his shoulder. Turning around, he found Jack standing beside him, his expression open and kind. "Daniel, isn't it?" Jack asked, a knowing smile on his face. Daniel nodded, his throat suddenly dry. Yes, that's right. Could I have a word with you in private? Jack asked, his voice gentle yet purposeful. Daniel swallowed hard, feeling a surge of nervousness. He nodded, following Jack to a small meeting room off to the side. Once they were seated, Jack's demeanor shifted, becoming more serious, though still approachable. I couldn't help but notice your reaction during the meeting, Jack began. It seemed like something I said struck a chord with you. Daniel hesitated, years of ingrained caution holding him back. He thought of Ellen, of the countless times he had watched her endure Mark's cruelty in silence. He knew he couldn't keep pretending nothing was wrong, not when the opportunity to create real change was right in front of him. Taking a deep breath, Daniel spoke, his voice shaky but determined. Yes, Mr. Hamilton, there is something you should know. And with that, he began to tell Jack everything. He spoke of Mark's treatment of Ellen, of the verbal abuse he had witnessed in the restroom, and of Ellen's recent collapse in the hallway. As he spoke, the weight of guilt and fear that had been pressing on him for so long seemed to lift, replaced by a strange sense of relief. Jack listened intently, his expression growing graver with each detail Daniel shared. When Daniel finally finished, Jack leaned back in his chair, processing everything he had just heard. Thank you for trusting me with this, Daniel, he said quietly. I know it wasn't easy for you to come forward, but you've done the right thing, and I want you to know that I'm committed to making things right. Daniel nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. What happens now? Jack's expression hardened with determination. Now, we take action. For Ellen, for you, and for everyone who has been affected by this toxic culture. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but I promise you, things are going to change. As Daniel left the meeting room, he felt as if he were seeing the office through new eyes. The fear that had held him back for so long was still there, but it was overshadowed by a sense of hope, a belief that, finally, things might get better. The following week marked the beginning of a new era at Hartwell Industries. Jack Hamilton wasted no time in implementing a series of changes designed to transform the company culture. Employees found themselves attending training sessions on inclusivity and respect, and a new code of conduct was circulated, outlining a zero-tolerance policy for any form of discrimination or harassment. Daniel was both amazed and slightly overwhelmed by the speed and scope of Jack's reforms. He had heard promises of change before, but he had never seen a leader put such actions into motion so quickly. For the first time, he felt optimistic that Hartwell Industries could become the respectful and supportive workplace it had once been, long before Mark Richardson's reign of intimidation. On the second day of Jack's new policies, word spread through the office like wildfire. Mark Richardson had been placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation into his behavior. The news sent shockwaves through the office, and employees were abuzz with whispered conversations, some shocked, others relieved. Daniel sat at his desk, trying to focus on his work, but his thoughts kept drifting to Ellen. He wondered if she had heard about Mark's suspension, or if she was even well enough to understand what was happening. The last he'd heard, she was still in the hospital, recovering from her collapse. The memory of her frail body lying on the floor haunted him. But knowing that steps were being taken to prevent anyone else from enduring what she had made him feel lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. As the changes continued, Daniel began to notice subtle shifts in the atmosphere around the office. His colleagues seemed more relaxed, and conversations were less guarded. People smiled more often, greeting each other warmly in the hallways, and even the tone of the emails and messages he received felt friendlier. A few days later, Jack called Daniel into his office for a private meeting. Daniel's heart pounded as he entered, unsure of what to expect. He hadn't interacted with Jack much since their initial conversation, but he knew that Jack's reforms had created ripples that everyone could feel. "Daniel, thank you for coming in," Jack said, gesturing for him to sit. "I wanted to discuss something important with you." Daniel took a seat, trying to hide his nervousness. "Of course, Mr. Hamilton. I'm happy to help in any way I can." Jack smiled. I've been thinking about how we can ensure these changes stick, how we can create a culture of accountability and openness. And after hearing what you shared with me about the situation here, I think you'd be the perfect person to help lead that charge." Daniel's eyes widened, unsure of what Jack was implying. "What do you mean?" "I'd like to offer you a new role," Jack said, his expression serious. "A position in our newly created Employee Relations Department. You'd be responsible for fostering an environment where people feel safe to speak up and where respect is the standard. I believe you're the right person for the job, Daniel." For a moment, Daniel was speechless. The idea of taking on a leadership role both excited and intimidated him. He had always wanted to make a difference, but he never thought he would be given the chance to lead such an important initiative. "Me? But I didn't speak up for so long," Daniel stammered, doubt clouding his voice. "I let things slide when I should have said something." Jack leaned forward, his expression encouraging. "And yet, when the time came, you did speak up. You showed courage, Daniel, the kind of courage this company needs. That's what matters now. Will you take on this challenge?" Daniel felt a surge of determination, the kind he hadn't felt in a long time. This was a chance to make things right, not just for Ellen but for everyone at Hartwell who had been affected by the toxic culture Mark had fostered. "Yes, Mr. Hamilton," he replied firmly, his voice filled with newfound resolve. "I'd be honored to take on this role." Jack extended his hand, and Daniel shook it, feeling the weight of responsibility settling over him in the best possible way. "Excellent. I have full confidence in you, Daniel. Together, we're going to create a company where everyone can thrive." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind as Daniel took on his new role. He threw himself into the work, organizing training sessions, implementing new policies, and creating an anonymous feedback system where employees could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. He felt a sense of purpose and satisfaction he'd never experienced before. However, the most significant moment came when Jack asked Daniel to accompany him to the hospital to visit Ellen. As they walked into the quiet, sterile room, Daniel's heart clenched at the sight of Ellen lying in the hospital bed, her face pale but her eyes as sharp and kind as ever. When she saw Daniel and Jack enter, her face broke into a smile that seemed to erase years from her features. "Mrs. Thompson," Jack greeted her warmly, pulling a chair close to her bedside. "I'm Jack Hamilton, the new CEO of Hartwell Industries, and I wanted to come here personally to offer you my apologies on behalf of the company. The way you were treated was unacceptable, and I promise you things are going to change." Ellen's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Jack, her voice trembling. "Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. I can't tell you how much this means to me." Daniel stood by, feeling a swell of gratitude and relief. Seeing Ellen treated with the respect she deserved filled him with a sense of closure he hadn't known he needed. But Jack wasn't finished. "We'd like to offer you an early retirement package," Jack continued gently. "Full benefits and a pension that will ensure you and your grandchildren are taken care of. It's the least we can do to try and make amends for what you've endured." Ellen's hand trembled as she reached out to shake Jack's hand, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. Thank you so much. You don't know what this means to me and my family." As they left the hospital room, Daniel felt an overwhelming sense of peace settles over him. Ellen would finally have the rest and support she needed, and he knew that her legacy would live on in the changes taking place at Hartwell. Back at the office, the changes became more visible with each passing day. The Employee Relations Department, under Daniel's leadership, quickly became a vital part of the company's operations. He worked tirelessly, meeting with employees, organizing mentorship programs, and ensuring that everyone's voice was heard. However, perhaps the most rewarding aspect of his new role was seeing the impact on his colleagues. The once tense atmosphere of the office was replaced by a sense of camaraderie and respect. Employees no longer seemed afraid to speak up, and even those who had been close to Mark began to adjust to the new, more inclusive culture. The transformation at Hartwell didn't go unnoticed. Soon, word of the company's commitment to diversity and respect spread, drawing positive attention from the industry. Jack and Daniel were even invited to speak at conferences, sharing the story of how a company that had once been plagued by a toxic culture had turned itself around. Daniel felt a deep sense of pride, not only for the work he was doing, but for the company Hartwell was becoming. Ellen's resilience had inspired him, and now her story was inspiring others. And as he walked through the halls of Hartwell, greeting employees with a smile, he felt a satisfaction he'd never known before. He had found his purpose, and it was just the beginning. As the weeks passed, Hartwell Industries continued to evolve under Jack and Daniel's guidance. What had started as a few training sessions and policy changes quickly expanded into a full-scale transformation. The newly created Employee Relations Department, led by Daniel, became the company's core for upholding fairness and respect. Daniel worked long hours coordinating initiatives that encouraged inclusivity and transparency, and it wasn't long before employees across the company began to take notice. The changes were subtle at first. Employees started greeting each other with genuine smiles, conversations in the hallways were friendlier, and small acts of kindness became more common. But soon, the culture shift gained momentum. People felt more comfortable voicing their thoughts and sharing ideas, and even those who had once been close to Mark's inner circle began to see the benefits of this new atmosphere. One day, as Daniel was heading to a meeting, he passed by a group of employees huddled around a whiteboard in the break room, discussing a project. Normally, they might have kept quiet or been hesitant to share ideas freely, but today they were engaged in an animated discussion, bouncing suggestions off each other with enthusiasm. He felt a surge of pride, knowing that the changes he'd helped bring about were making a real difference in how people interacted. Still, despite the positive changes, there were some who struggled to adapt. Mark's suspension had left a few loyal followers uneasy and uncertain about their future within the company. For them, the shift toward inclusivity felt uncomfortable, and some resisted the new policies, grumbling about the unnecessary changes. However, Jack and Daniel remained firm in their commitment, knowing that with time, even the most reluctant employees would come to appreciate the improvements. As Hartwell's reputation as a fair and respectful workplace grew, it began to attract top talent from diverse backgrounds. Skilled professionals who might have once avoided Hartwell due to its rigid culture now sought positions within the company. The influx of new perspectives and fresh ideas led to a surge of innovation and creativity, boosting morale and productivity across departments. The results were evident. Hartwell Industries was thriving in ways it never had before. One afternoon, as Daniel was reviewing feedback reports in his office, he received an unexpected visitor. Looking up from his desk, he saw Ellen standing in the doorway, a soft smile on her face. She looked healthier and happier than he'd seen her in years, and he couldn't help but smile back. "Mrs. Thompson, what a pleasant surprise," he said, rising to greet her. "Oh, please, Daniel," she chuckled, stepping forward to shake his hand. "You know you can call me Ellen now." Daniel laughed, nodding. "Right. Old habits, I suppose?" Ellen took a seat across from him, glancing around his office with approval. "You've done well for yourself, Daniel. But more importantly, you've done well for others. I've been hearing all about the changes you've been making here." Daniel felt a flush of pride at her words. "It's thanks to people like you, Ellen. You've inspired us all more than you know." She nodded thoughtfully, her eyes bright with emotion. "Thank you, Daniel. I only wish I could have been part of this sooner." "You are part of this," he assured her, his voice sincere. "You're the reason these changes even happened. And actually, there's something I'd love to talk to you about." Ellen raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh, what's that?" "We're starting a mentorship program," Daniel explained, his tone eager. "The goal is to foster a sense of community and support for new employees as they settle in. I thought you'd be the perfect advisor to help us get it up and running. Your experience, your wisdom, you're exactly what we need." Ellen's eyes sparkled, and for a moment, she seemed to consider the offer. "I'd be honored to help, Daniel," she said warmly. "I may be retired, but I'm more than happy to lend a hand if it means helping others." Daniel's smile widened. "Thank you, Ellen. This program will mean a lot to our employees, and having you involved makes it even more special." As they chatted about the mentorship program, Daniel couldn't help but marvel at the turn of events. Ellen, who had once endured so much hardship in silence, was now at the heart of a movement to build a supportive, compassionate workplace. Her story had become a source of inspiration, a reminder to everyone at Hartwell of the resilience that defined the company's new values. In the months that followed, the mentorship program flourished. New hires were paired with experienced employees who could offer guidance and support, easing their transition into the company. Ellen's influence was evident. She helped develop training materials, organized orientation sessions, and provided mentorship to anyone who sought her advice. Even in retirement, she was shaping Hartwell's future, leaving a lasting impact on the next generation of employees. One day, Daniel received an email from a young intern named Mira, who had recently joined the marketing team. She requested a meeting to discuss something important. Intrigued, Daniel agreed, arranging to meet with her later that afternoon. When Mira arrived at his office, he was struck by her look of determination mixed with nervousness. She introduced herself formally and took a seat, folding her hands in her lap as she gathered her thoughts. "Mr. Evans, I wanted to thank you for everything you've done here at Hartwell," Mira began, her voice steady. "You see, my grandmother used to work here." Daniel's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Really? Who was your grandmother?" A faint smile touched Mira's lips as she replied, "Ellen Thompson." Daniel felt a rush of emotion. Ellen's granddaughter, working at Hartwell, it was almost poetic. "Ellen is your grandmother? That's incredible. She's an amazing person, Mira. We owe her a lot for everything she did here." Mira's eyes shone with pride. "She always spoke highly of you, Mr. Evans. She said you were the one who finally had the courage to speak up about what was happening here. That's why I wanted to talk to you today." Daniel's curiosity deepened. "Go on." Mira took a deep breath, visibly gathering her courage. "I've noticed some things in my department. Nothing as severe as what my grandmother endured. But there are some attitudes and comments that make me uncomfortable. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but then I thought of her story, and I knew I had to speak up." Daniel listened closely as Mira shared her concerns. The issues she described were subtle, the kind of biases and microaggressions that, if left unchecked, could create a toxic environment over time. When she finished, Daniel nodded, his expression serious. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Mira," he said. "You absolutely did the right thing by speaking up. We'll address these issues immediately." He paused, then added, "You know, your grandmother would be incredibly proud of you. It takes courage to stand up, especially when you're just starting out." Mira's eyes welled with tears. "Thank you, Mr. Evans. That means a lot to me." After Mira left, Daniel sat back, lost in thought. Ellen's legacy had come full circle, living on through her granddaughter, who had found the strength to voice her concerns. It was a powerful reminder of how lasting change could be and how it could touch lives in ways he hadn't anticipated. The next day, Daniel called a meeting with the marketing department heads to address Mira's concerns. Without revealing her identity, he outlined a plan to implement additional training and accountability measures, emphasizing the importance of maintaining a respectful environment. "I know some of you might think these issues are minor," Daniel told them. "But it's these small things that lay the foundation for our culture. Every word and action matters, no matter how small. We all have a responsibility to create a workplace where everyone feels valued and respected." As the meeting concluded, Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer the silent bystander he'd once been. Instead, he was helping to build a company where every employee felt empowered to speak up. Months passed, and the changes at Hartwell Industries became not only a point of pride internally, but also a story that began to attract attention outside the company. The business world took notice of the transformation, with industry publications featuring Hartwell's journey from a rigid, toxic environment to a shining example of inclusivity and respect. Jack Hamilton's leadership, combined with Daniel's dedication to improving employee relations, had turned Hartwell Industries into a success story that everyone wanted to hear. One afternoon, as Daniel was preparing for another meeting, he received an email that left him momentarily speechless. It was from the National Association for Workplace Equality, informing him that Hartwell Industries had been selected to receive their prestigious Outstanding Commitment to Diversity and Inclusion Award. The organization had recognized Hartwell's efforts as a model of positive change, highlighting the remarkable impact of the new company culture on employee satisfaction and productivity. The email ended with a special note. They wanted Daniel to accept the award on behalf of the company. Staring at the screen, Daniel felt a mix of disbelief and overwhelming pride. It was hard to believe how far they had come. He had once been a quiet bystander, silently observing the injustices around him, and now he was being asked to represent Hartwell as an example of progress. Just as he was processing the news, he received a call from Jack. "Daniel," Jack began warmly, "I just got word about the award. Congratulations, I can't think of anyone more deserving to accept it than you." "Thank you, Jack," Daniel replied, his voice filled with gratitude. "This recognition, it means a lot. I only wish Ellen could be there to see it." Jack's voice softened. "Ellen may not be there in person, but her legacy lives on in every change you've made here, Daniel. And I know she's proud of you." As the day of the award ceremony approached, Daniel reflected on the journey that had brought him here. His mind drifted back to that pivotal moment in the restroom, the day he'd remained silent while Ellen endured Mark's cruel words. He had carried the weight of that moment for so long, yet now he understood that it was the catalyst that had driven him to seek change. Ellen's strength had inspired him to be better, to fight for a workplace where everyone felt valued and respected. The award ceremony was held in a grand conference hall, and when Daniel took the stage to accept the award, he was met with a round of applause from the audience. Holding the award in his hands, he felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This wasn't just an acknowledgement of Hartwell's achievements. It was a validation of every decision he had made to stand up for what was right. In his acceptance speech, Daniel spoke from the heart. "Thank you for this incredible honor. This award represents more than just a transformation in one company. It's a testament to the power of listening, of courage, and of compassion. Hartwell Industries was once a place where people felt voiceless and afraid, but today it's a company that values every individual's contribution. And none of this would have been possible without those who inspired us along the way, including people like Ellen Thompson, whose strength and resilience are at the heart of everything we do." As he spoke Ellen's name, he felt a surge of pride. The audience responded with respectful applause, and Daniel knew in that moment that her story would continue to inspire others. After the ceremony, representatives from other companies approached him, eager to learn more about Hartwell's transformation. They wanted advice, guidance, and insight into how they could bring similar changes to their own organizations. Daniel spent hours answering questions, sharing stories, and explaining the importance of fostering a workplace built on respect and inclusivity. It was humbling to realize that the ripple effect of Hartwell's journey was reaching far beyond their own walls. Back at the office the next day, Daniel shared the news of the award with the team, and a wave of pride swept through the employees. This award wasn't just for him or Jack. It was for everyone who had been a part of the transformation, from the most senior executives to the newest interns. That afternoon, Daniel received a visitor he hadn't expected. It was Mira, Ellen's granddaughter, who had recently been promoted within the marketing team. She entered his office, a wide smile lighting up her face. "Mr. Evans," Mira began, her voice filled with excitement, "I just heard about the award. Congratulations." Daniel returned her smile, gesturing for her to sit. "Thank you, Mira. It's an honor for all of us." Mira nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "I wanted to thank you personally, on behalf of my grandmother. She always said that you were the one who finally made a difference here. I know she would be so proud of everything you've done." Daniel's heart warmed as he listened to Mira's words. "Thank you, Mira. I owe so much of this to her strength. She showed us all what it means to stand tall in the face of adversity." Mira paused, her expression thoughtful. "You know, I think about her story a lot, and it gives me courage. I even shared it with a few of my friends in other companies who are dealing with their own challenges. It's amazing how one person's journey can inspire so many others." Daniel felt a surge of gratitude. Ellen's impact was reaching far beyond Hartwell, touching people who had never even met her. "Your grandmother was truly one of a kind, Mira, and I see so much of her strength in you." They chatted for a while longer, discussing ideas for further improving the company's culture, before Mira excused herself to return to her work. As she left, Daniel couldn't help but feel a profound sense of connection to the legacy Ellen had left behind. A few days later, Jack surprised Daniel with another announcement. The Employee Relations Department would be renamed the Thompson Center for Employee Well-Being, in honor of Ellen. The new name would serve as a permanent reminder of her resilience and the values she had inspired. The news spread quickly, and employees expressed their appreciation for the change, many of them moved by the tribute. For Daniel, it was a fitting way to honor the woman who had quietly endured so much and had, in the end, sparked a transformation that would be remembered for years to come. In the following weeks, Daniel continued his work with a renewed sense of purpose. The mentorship program expanded, new training initiatives were developed, and the Thompson Center became a central hub for employee support and resources. People from all levels of the company began to view it as a place where they could share ideas, voice concerns, and find support. Then one day, as Daniel was wrapping up his work, Jack stopped by his office with a thoughtful smile. "Daniel," he said, "I wanted to thank you for everything you've done here. This company is a better place because of your leadership." "Thank you, Jack," Daniel replied. "I couldn't have done it without your support. Together, we've built something truly meaningful." Jack nodded. "I have no doubt that Hartwell will continue to grow and thrive with people like you at the helm. And speaking of growth, I think it's time we look at taking some of these initiatives beyond our own walls. Other companies could benefit from what we've learned here." Daniel's eyes widened as he realized the full scope of Jack's vision. The ripple effect of their work was already spreading, and now they had the opportunity to share Hartwell's journey as a blueprint for positive change across the industry. As Jack left the office, Daniel sat back, his mind racing with possibilities. Hartwell had come a long way from the place it had been just a few years ago, but their journey was far from over. The transformation they had achieved was just the beginning, and he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, armed with the lessons they had learned along the way. As he packed up for the night, Daniel looked around the office, taking in the sense of community and hope that filled the space. They had built something truly special here, a workplace where everyone, regardless of background or position, could feel valued and empowered. And he knew that together, they would continue to carry Ellen's legacy forward, one day at a time. The creation of the Thompson Center for Employee Well-Being had a profound effect on Hartwell Industries. Located on the second floor, the center offered a welcoming space where employees could access resources, discuss workplace challenges, and find support. The Thompson Center quickly became a hub for mentorship, guidance, and open dialogue, something that had once been unimaginable at Hartwell. It was a tribute to Ellen Thompson, a woman who had endured so much and whose quiet strength had sparked a transformation that would resonate for years to come. Daniel's role as head of the Thompson Center kept him busy, but he relished every moment. Each day he saw firsthand how much Hartwell's culture had changed, and he felt a deep sense of pride in what they'd accomplished. Employees who might once have felt isolated or marginalized now had a place where they felt safe to express themselves and seek help. One afternoon, as Daniel was reviewing a new set of employee feedback, he received a knock on his office door. He looked up to see Jack Hamilton, the CEO, smiling warmly. "Got a moment?" Jack asked. "Of course," Daniel replied, gesturing for him to come in. "Always for you." Jack settled into the chair across from Daniel's desk, his expression thoughtful. "I wanted to touch base about the impact of the Thompson Center. The feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, but I was wondering if there's anything we can do to enhance the experience further." Daniel nodded, understanding Jack's commitment to continuous improvement. "Actually, I've been thinking about that too. There's so much potential here, and I'd love to expand the mentorship program to include training for mentors. We could also start holding quarterly workshops where employees from different departments come together to discuss their experiences and challenges." Jack's eyes lit up. I like that idea, especially the cross-departmental workshops. It's a great way to foster collaboration and understanding. Let's make it happen. They spent the next hour brainstorming ideas, and as they talked, Daniel felt grateful to be working alongside a leader who shared his passion for inclusivity and respect. Jack's vision for the company aligned perfectly with his own, and together they were building something truly impactful. After their discussion, Jack leaned back, a smile on his face. You know, Daniel, I never could have imagined that hiring you for this role would lead to such incredible changes. You've done so much here, and I hope you know how appreciated you are. Daniel felt a warmth in his chest, a validation he hadn't known he needed. Thank you, Jack, but this was a team effort. Everyone here contributed to the transformation, especially Ellen. Jack's smile softened. Indeed, Ellen's strength is the foundation of everything we're building here. Her legacy is alive in this place, and I think she would be proud of what you've done. As Jack left, Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew there was still much work to be done, but with the support of people like Jack and the dedication of his colleagues, he was confident that Hartwell would continue to thrive. Over the following months, the Thompson Center expanded its programs, and the quarterly workshops quickly became a favorite among employees. People from all levels and departments came together to share their experiences, learning from one another, and building bonds that transcended job titles. The workshops encouraged open dialogue, and many employees said they felt more connected to their colleagues than ever before. It wasn't long before other companies began reaching out, inspired by Hartwell's success. Daniel found himself fielding calls from HR directors and managers who wanted to know how they could replicate Hartwell's approach to inclusivity and respect. The Thompson Center became a model for other businesses, its influence extending beyond Hartwell's walls. One afternoon, Mira stopped by Daniel's office, her expression bright. She had been an active participant in the mentorship program and had recently taken on the role of mentoring a new intern. Daniel had watched her grow into a confident, compassionate leader, and he knew that Ellen would have been immensely proud. Mr. Evans, Mira began, her eyes shining with excitement. I just wanted to thank you. This mentorship program has made such a difference in my life. I feel like I'm really making an impact here. Daniel smiled, genuinely moved. Mira, you've come so far. I have no doubt that your grandmother would be incredibly proud of the leader you're becoming. Mira's smile grew, and for a moment she looked down, visibly touched. That means a lot to me. She used to tell me that real strength comes from standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. I hope I can live up to her example. You already are, Daniel assured her, and you're inspiring others along the way. They chatted for a while, discussing the program and brainstorming ways to enhance it further. As Mira left, Daniel felt a surge of hope for the future. The seeds of change Ellen had planted had taken root and were growing in ways he hadn't anticipated. Weeks later, Daniel received an invitation from a prominent industry conference. The organizers had heard about Hartwell's transformation and wanted him to speak about the company's journey and the creation of the Thompson Center. Daniel was both honored and nervous, but he knew that sharing their story could help others bring positive change to their own workplaces. On the day of the conference, Daniel stood before a packed auditorium, the audience attentive and curious. He took a deep breath, remembering Ellen's unwavering resilience, and began his speech. Hartwell Industries was once a place where people felt voiceless, isolated, and even afraid, he began. But we've learned that with the right leadership, the right values, and the courage to act, any organization can change. And it starts with listening. Truly listening to those who have been marginalized or overlooked. He spoke about Ellen, her strength, and how her experiences had inspired him to make a difference. As he shared the story of Hartwell's transformation, he saw nods of understanding in the audience. People were connecting with the message, understanding that change was not only possible, but necessary. When the speech ended, the applause was thunderous. People approached him afterward, eager to learn more, to ask questions, and to share their own challenges. Daniel left the conference with a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that Ellen's story had touched people beyond Hartwell, inspiring others to seek positive change. Back at Hartwell, the Thompson Center continued to thrive. The new hires viewed the center as a place of support, a unique feature that set Hartwell apart from other companies. Each time Daniel walked through the center, he saw employees working together, mentoring one another, and supporting their colleagues with genuine compassion. The culture Ellen had inspired was now woven into the fabric of the company, and Daniel knew it would endure for generations to come. One evening, as he prepared to leave the office, Daniel received a call from Jack. "Daniel," Jack began, his tone warm, "I just wanted to tell you personally the Thompson Center is a remarkable success, and that's all because of you." "Thank you, Jack," Daniel replied, feeling a wave of gratitude. "But the credit belongs to everyone here. We've built this together." As he hung up the phone, Daniel felt a profound sense of peace. They had created a workplace where people could thrive, a place where everyone's voice mattered. As he locked up his office and walked through the empty hallways, he knew that Ellen's legacy would continue to inspire, both within Hartwell and beyond. As he stepped outside, he looked up at the evening sky, feeling the quiet satisfaction of knowing he'd helped build something meaningful. Hartwell was no longer just a company, it was a community. He would continue to honor Ellen's memory by ensuring that every person who walked through its doors felt respected, valued, and empowered. Tomorrow and every day after, Daniel would carry her legacy forward, one step at a time. Book back. As the months rolled on, Hartwell Industries' transformation continued to be a story of inspiration. Industry articles celebrated the company's efforts, and employees, once hesitant to speak, now shared their experiences openly. The Thompson Center had become more than just a workplace resource. It was a symbol of respect, integrity, and hope, offering employees support and encouragement at every stage of their careers. For Daniel, the change felt nothing short of a miracle. Each day, he walked through the halls with pride, greeting people he had once only passed by silently. He saw the difference the new culture made in people's lives. They laughed more, worked together freely, and genuinely cared for one another. What had once been a cold, competitive environment was now a community united by the values that Ellen had helped inspire. On a quiet Friday afternoon, as Daniel prepared to head home for the weekend, he received an email from Mira. She'd written a heartfelt message reflecting on her journey at Hartwell and the impact her grandmother's legacy had made on her life. Reading her words, Daniel felt a deep, overwhelming sense of gratitude. "Mr. Evans, I wanted to take a moment to thank you again for everything you've done to create a culture of respect and inclusion here at Hartwell. Working here has shown me the power of standing up for what's right, just as my grandmother did. She always said that courage is contagious, and now I understand what she meant. Because of what you and others here have built, I feel empowered to be a voice for those who feel unheard. Thank you for honoring her memory and for building a place where people, regardless of background, feel valued. I hope to continue her legacy by inspiring others just as she inspired you." Gratefully, Mira Daniel read the message twice, feeling an immense pride, not just for what Hartwell had achieved, but for the hope that Ellen's legacy continued to inspire in others. It was people like Mira, young leaders ready to make a difference, who were the true future of Hartwell Industries. He replied, thanking Mira and expressing his admiration for her courage and dedication, knowing her grandmother would be immensely proud. It struck him then that Ellen's legacy was more than just a memory. It was living, breathing, and growing within Hartwell and beyond, shaping the company's future with each new generation. The next week, Hartwell Industries held a ceremony to commemorate the one-year anniversary of the Thompson Center's opening. Employees from across the company gathered to celebrate the success of the center and the progress they had all made together. Daniel was asked to speak, and as he looked out over the crowd, he felt the weight of the journey they'd traveled together. "Today, we celebrate more than just the Thompson Center," Daniel began. "We celebrate the strength of each person who has contributed to the culture we've built here, a culture where everyone feels heard and valued. This journey wasn't easy, and it required each of us to look inward, to challenge old habits, and to embrace new values. He paused, scanning the crowd and seeing the faces of his colleagues, his friends, and his team. He noticed Mira standing near the front, her face lit with pride. This center was named for someone who embodied resilience, someone who inspired us all by facing adversity with quiet courage, he continued. Ellen Thompson may no longer walk these halls, but her spirit lives on in every act of kindness, every gesture of respect, and every voice that speaks up. Her legacy reminds us of the power of integrity and the difference we can make when we stand together. The room erupted in applause, and as Daniel stepped back, he felt a profound sense of closure. This journey had taken him from silence to action, from being a bystander to becoming a leader who advocated for others. And now, he was surrounded by people who shared that vision, each one dedicated to building a company where everyone, regardless of background or title, could thrive. Later that evening, as the ceremony wrapped up, Jack approached Daniel with a smile. "I couldn't have asked for a better leader for the Thompson Center," he said, shaking Daniel's hand. "Thank you for everything you've done, Daniel. Hartwell is a different place today because of you." Daniel nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Jack. I couldn't have done it without your support and without everyone here believing in the vision." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as the employees slowly dispersed, chatting and laughing as they headed home. For Jack and Daniel, this was more than just a successful initiative. It was a testament to what was possible when people chose to act with courage and compassion. Over the following years, Hartwell Industries continued to be a beacon of positive change. The company's reputation for integrity, respect, and inclusivity drew talent from all over the country, and each new employee brought fresh ideas and perspectives that enriched the culture. The Thompson Center expanded its resources, offering new programs focused on mental health, work-life balance, and career development. Mira eventually rose through the ranks, becoming a respected leader in her own right. She carried her grandmother's legacy with her, often sharing Ellen's story with new hires as a reminder of the values Hartwell was built upon. She and Daniel worked closely on new initiatives, ensuring the company remained true to its mission of inclusivity. One day, as Daniel walked through the halls of Hartwell, he caught sight of a group of interns gathered near the Thompson Center. They were laughing and engaged in an animated discussion about their projects and the excitement of working in such a supportive environment. Daniel paused, listening to their energy and enthusiasm, and felt an overwhelming sense of pride. Hartwell Industries was no longer just a place of work. It had become a community, a place where people could grow and learn together, unencumbered by fear or prejudice. Ellen's legacy had woven itself into the very fabric of the company, creating an environment where respect and kindness were the norm, not the exception. As he continued down the hall, Daniel thought back to his journey and the pivotal moments that had led him here. He thought of Ellen, of her quiet strength, and of the day he had finally found the courage to speak up. And he knew that while his story was only a small part of Hartwell's transformation, it was a piece that would continue to inspire others long after he was gone. That evening, as he locked up his office and turned off the lights, Daniel made one final promise to himself. He would carry on Ellen's legacy by continuing to advocate for those who felt unseen or unheard. He would keep building a workplace where kindness and respect were the foundations, and he would do everything in his power to make sure Hartwell remained a place where people felt valued. As he stepped outside, Daniel looked up at the stars, feeling a profound sense of peace. The journey had been long, challenging, and at times painful, but it had been worth every moment. Ellen's strength had taught him the true meaning of leadership, and now, as he looked toward the future, he knew he was ready for whatever lay ahead. Hartwell Industries had become a beacon of hope, a model for other companies striving to create inclusive environments. As the news of its transformation spread, Daniel hoped that Ellen's legacy would inspire countless others to build workplaces rooted in respect and equality. With a smile, he turned and walked to his car, knowing that Hartwell's story was far from over. Tomorrow, there will be new challenges to face, new opportunities to make a difference, and new lives to touch. And with each step forward, Daniel would carry with him the memory of Ellen, her legacy forever etched into the heart of Hartwell Industries, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and the unwavering belief that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. The story of Ellen, Daniel, and Hartwell Industries carries powerful messages about resilience, respect, and the courage to bring positive change. This journey showed how one person's quiet strength can inspire transformation, touching the lives of countless others. Ellen's enduring dignity, even in the face of disrespect, laid the groundwork for a new culture at Hartwell Industries, one where integrity, compassion, and fairness became central values. Through Daniel's journey, we see how standing up for what's right, despite fear and uncertainty, can create a lasting impact. This story reminds us that workplaces aren't just about productivity or profits. They're communities where everyone deserves to feel valued and respected. True leadership goes beyond titles or power. It's about creating an environment where all people can thrive. Hartwell's transformation teaches us that change, even in deeply rooted systems, is possible when people are willing to listen, speak up, and work together. For those of us inspired by this story, the takeaway is clear. We each have a role to play in building inclusive, supportive communities, whether in the workplace or beyond. Every act of kindness, every instance of empathy, and every decision to stand up for someone else can ripple outward, creating a better environment for all. If you found this story meaningful, please comment with a 1. If it deeply resonated with you, comment with a 2. And don't hesitate to share your own experiences and thoughts with us. We'd love to hear your stories. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the upcoming stories that will be full of inspiration. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments below.